Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to today's Activists Around the World. And today we're talking about an icon in the feminist anti-fascist movement and research. She's a professor, an advocate, writer, leader, and so much more. We are talking about Veronica Gago. And Gago is a published author and professor of social science focusing on feminism and overall governmental policies and economy. So she's a professor for the Faculty of Social Science at the University of Buenos Aires and the National University of San Martin. Yes, this is also going to be a test into my high school Spanish. Apologies in advance. But here we go. So in addition to her research and published works, which she has several, she also has been an active member and co-founder of the Ni Una Menos movement, or Not One More in English, which hosted strikes throughout Argentina to protest the sexist and inhumane treatment of women in the country and anti-abortion laws. They were a part of that green movement, and we've talked about and we praised and we wish for our own. But all of that to say, she was one of the big centers and focuses of that. She grew up in Argentina during a time that caused a lot of financial and economic crisis in the country. So it's not surprising to know that her family were active within political discourse, and this kind of like pushed her into activism as well. And she has put it into practice, the different types of activism that push Argentina to step forward in their feminist movement. She is a force. And I will say, after I was reading all about her, there's so much information, of course, because she is a professional, a writer, a researcher, that we couldn't focus on everything. So we were giving tidbits here and there, including some of the books that she has written. She has had many lectures. She is on YouTube. She is on different podcasts. We probably should have her on. I feel like that about many of our activists, but just so you know, we're just kind of dwindling it down to our 15 minutes or less episode in this one. So apologies if I missed something that you think is important. And if you do, let me know, because I know, again, she's an icon in this community. So here's a bit more about her organization, Ni Una Menos, from her article titled Violence, Feminist Struggles Against Victimization to Set Fear on Fire. Quote, the Ni Una Menos, not One Woman Less movement emerged in response to the multiple and specific forms of violence faced by women, lesbians, trans, travestis, and non-binary people. By occupying the streets at a mass scale in Argentina and Ayala more broadly, the question of violence has escaped from its enclosure under the concept of domestic violence and the mode of its domestication through the response attempted by institutions, NGOs, and philanthropic and paternalistic forms of management. So she has really dug deep into the connections of the multifaceted ways of striking against violence or protesting against violence and violations against the marginalized communities. She talks about using these tactics as a way of radicalizing a movement, not allowing for a single-pronged strategy, but more of a large-scale response. So I think it's something really important that we should be learning more about, because we don't do this well. We don't do this well in the U.S., I think. But in another article published for the Journal of Latin American Geography for the University of Texas Press, she writes, Argentina's massive popular and radical feminist movement has revitalized political struggles in the country, building a transversal movement capable of challenging multiple forms of violence that have differential impacts on women and feminized bodies. It has done so by opening up new forms of knowing and inventing new political tactics by weaving together different know-hows and knowledges based on a multiplicity of heterogeneous concrete bodies and experience. Writing from this feminist movement and situated within the experience of the feminist strike, we know how the strike, as a process, calls into question hegemonic forms of knowing and assumptions about the subject of that knowing through embodied and embedded process of investigation and knowledge creation that produce new subjects, new concepts, and new internationalist and plurinational alliances. Oh, that was a lot. But she does talk about the fact that it opens up so many things, essentially. Like it brings in new ways of protest, of counter-protest, of tactics, of political movements, and how it does revitalize and revolutionizes something that has been needed for so long and something that's been used for so long. Go back and read our book about the different movements and protests throughout the years. And she continues with a practical, detailed approach, saying the feminist strike as an ongoing, evolving practice involves assemblies and meetings, work stoppages and blockades, encounters between women and other forms of being together, and practices of care and of invention among women. As such, the strike involves diverse forms of collective and embodied knowledge production that challenge clear divisions between scholars and activists. Not knowledge in the abstract, this feminist know-how based on situated knowledge practices in concrete territories and bodies implies other ways of knowing, valuing the not knowing body, sensibilities, and intuitions. This knowing from the body challenges the colonial capitalist patriarchal unconscious by questioning pre-established identities and reactionary fears and creating new forms of desire and subjectivities. Rivera Kosinkanki also speaks of the importance of the body of weaving together manual tasks with intellectual ones, thinking with the hands, heart, and brain at the same time in everyday collective practices as an important feature of these new waves of movements. And I know we've talked about this before with previous people who were starting movements, protests, about how that is so important, about being able to do it intellectually and with passion. This is like a to-do know-how.
Yeah.
She has 3 different books about it, y'all. Within these published articles, she talks about the roles these actions play, political tactic and research methodology, and how those processes have to be large picture, including the entirety of the groups affected. So we have to understand intersectionality.
Yep.
But with that, she digs deep into areas where it's characterized as feminized economy, meaning that the area is made up and largely ran by women, migrants, and other marginalized communities, but they are not given equity or equality. So feminized economy. I feel like that needs to be a phrase that we hear more often. So this would continue in her later works with the question of the backlash against women. From a Georgetown University's look into Gago's book, Pratik Asokan writes this of Gago's book, Feminists International, a work of political analysis and self-reflection. It was written from within the massive feminist mobilizations that swept Latin America from 2017 onwards. Gago presents the seemingly inexorable rise of gendered violence across the continent as a conservative backlash led by disenfranchised men against the appearance of women in the workplace, specifically in the informal sector, as in the maquiladoras in Ciudad Juarez and other towns along the U.S.-Mexico border. And on the broader scope, Gago addresses the already existence of a large network of feminist movements. She writes, "It is an internationalism that requires alliance in every possible place, with strawberry-picking day laborers, Morocco women working during harvest times in Andalusia, and the peasant unions and activist collectives of the towns and cities, between women laid off from textile factories and students fighting against education cuts, between indigenous women in rebellion and community organizers in each neighborhood of the urban peripheries." So again, this kind of is that larger question of the pushback versus the entire entity of those marginalized and those who are oppressed, and how big of a part that does play in movements like these. And with that, talking about one of the biggest forces of oppression on women around the world, debt and finances, which we talked about before, which she expands upon in her latest book, A Feminist Reading of Debt, which she co-wrote with Lucy Cavallero. A bit more from Asokan's article, they write, she focuses on how the patriarchal financial apparatuses renew the colonial pact in the present, combining it with forms of domination and exploitation. In her argument, the patriarchal financial apparatuses are revealed to be fundamental for understanding the counterinsurgent dimension of war against women and feminized bodies. This requires that feminism be international too. Yeah, like I know there's so many conversations where we talked about how feminism is so weaponized and so looked down upon, but this type of conversation is why that word is so important, so important. Obviously, when you have a feminist giant like Gago's, we're only skimming the vast amount of knowledge and research that Gago's has laid out. But one thing that did catch my eye was her response to the U.S.'s Roe v. Wade overturning. And she was quick to speak up about the importance of mobilization. So she actually wrote this for The Guardian, and it's titled, "What Latin American Feminists Can Teach American Women About the Abortion Fight." She writes, An important element for understanding the massiveness of these mobilizations was precisely the way in which the struggle for abortion was woven together with other feminist struggles. This allowed for cognitively and politically connecting the different forms of violence against women and feminized bodies as systemic violence. The violence of often deadly and costly clandestine abortion was thus connected to domestic violence, sexual harassment, and the gendered pay gap in the workplace, and to the murders of female environment and Indigenous activists in the rural areas. In turn, this enabled constructing the demand of abortion in terms that go beyond merely individual right, challenging the conception of the body as private property. The green tide flooded spaces everywhere, including schools, slums, union squares, and soup kitchens. Through this transversality, the body that had been put up for debate took on a collective and class dimension. This occurred because discussion about the clandestine condition of abortion directly referred to the costs that make it differentially risky according to one's social and economic position. Those who were most harmed by the criminalization of abortion were the women and people with the capacity to gestate with the fewest economic resources, those who could not pay for safe abortions. Therefore, the right to abortion was considered inseparable from the demand that it be guaranteed in the public healthcare system. In turn, the demand for a comprehensive sexual education in the public education curriculum allowed for deepening debates about sexualities, corporalities, relationships, and effects, displacing the question in a radical way. So there was a lot. It was obviously very thorough, but I feel like there's so much in this conversation. We haven't talked enough about what it looks like to come together today. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of protests, and we know there's a lot of protests happening in LA and all over the country today that we're not seeing news about because, of course, they want to hide that, and we love that, and we want to talk more about it. But this is the understanding of what it looks like when it's a mass movement, with the understanding that this is intersectional. It has to be intersectional for it to be mobilized and to actually open up into an entire national movement. It has to be intersectional. So I found her works to be really fascinating, and I think we have to dig more into her words for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And listeners, if you have any thoughts on any of this or what works we should delve into next of what she has done, please let us know. You can email us at hello@stuffI'venevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I've Never Told You. We're also on YouTube, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you, and I'm sorry.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.